and instead I'm going to turn things over to our special celebrity guest introducer, my favorite farrier poet in the world, Earl Craig is here.
Hey. How many farrier poets are there out there? I don't know. Probably are a couple. All right. So, hello. Thanks everybody for coming out. I'm here to introduce two good friends of mine who are fellow poets, and Henrietta Goodman is up first. I have known Henrietta for over 30 years. And so when I was at U of M in Missoula, I was an undergrad, and Henrietta, who is the same age as I am, was in the grad program, so that was a little strange. They let us take workshops with grad students, and that's how I met Henrietta. So Henrietta Goodman grew up in the Piedmont region of North Carolina and earned an MFA from the University of Montana. She received an individual artist fellowship from the Montana Arts Council in 2001, and in 2002 was awarded the Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency. Her poems have appeared in Mid-American Review, Willow Springs, Runes, a review of poetry, Northwest Review, and other journals. She currently teaches in the University of Montana's Writing Center.
Where'd you get that bio?
That's wrong. Scratch that last line. Everything was true up until then. She is an assistant professor of English at Rocky Mountain College in Billings. How's that? And the author of All That Held Us, Hungry Moon, Take What You Want, and this new book, which you will read from tonight, Antillia. So, without further ado, please welcome Henrietta Goodman.
Oh my God. Hi. Can you hear me okay? All right. Wow, this is great. Thank you all for coming. Mark, thank you for letting me, I don't know where you are. Oh, there you are. Thank you for letting me crash your book release with my book release. I'm Mark's opening act, so I'll be about 10 minutes and then I'm gonna stop. I gotta fix this. Okay, there we go. So, let's see. I feel like I'm making weird noises. There we go. So I'm going to start actually with a pretty new poem. I read, my official book release was in Missoula a few weeks ago, and I read with the wonderful poet Phil Schaefer, and he said that at every reading he tries to start with something new. And I thought, well, that's good, because you know how it goes. I mean, you publish a book, and by the time the book is actually out, wow, it's been a long time, and what seems like it should be new actually doesn't feel so new at all. So I just did a poetry roundtable at the Billings Public Library last night, and I read this poem. So I think I'll start with it just because it's strange. It came from an assignment. A friend told me a couple of years ago that I should write a poem about Milo of Croton. And I had no idea who Milo of Croton was. Maybe you know. I had to do a lot of research. It turns out Milo of Croton was a 6th century BC Greek athlete, and he was really into progressive overload training, which I'm also really into. So I think that's where the assignment came from. But his technique, as the poem will tell you, was to basically carry a bull around, because it was 6th century BC, and that's how they did things. So this one is called After All, He Had Borne the Bull. After all, he had borne the bull in his arms since its birth, held the velvet withers and flank, felt the brush of lashes, the weather-veined ears, the split hearts of its hooves, lifted it to his chest, his shoulders, over his head, squatted with it draped, bull scarf around his neck, even as it grew far more massive by far than he, 70 pounds each month, still that daily ritual, the exchange of odors, sounds, a grunt, a gentle huffing. When the bull reached more than thrice his size, when he could no longer raise its 1,000 pounds past his hips, he killed, roasted, and ate the weight he had carried so long. In the last match, his opponent held Milo at arm's length, sparring, never chest to chest, never crushed by those arms that had embraced the bull. 26 centuries later, scholars still debate whether the loss was real or symbol of brawn versus brain, of the shift from sheer strength to acroturismus, like acrobat, that netless aerial ballet of toes and fingers on tightrope and trapeze, a body catching another body in midair. But that's a different kind of symbol. When his opponent would not grapple, Milo foundered. I too am no good at that long, high-handed dance. Come closer. When I read it last night, I said it was a love poem, which because we were supposed to be doing rounds of themed poems, and the theme was love, and I thought, well, okay, that's kind of. I'm going to actually read this poem from my phone, only because at dinner, Mark and I were talking about, apparently, Sean Devine posted one of my poems last year on social media when we were doing this words and music thing. I think you did, Sean. And then Mark read it and got inspired to write a poem that he's going to read to you in just a little bit. So I found it online. So we're going back in time to the time that Earl was about to tell you about there. If I can find it. Oh, now it's got to think about it. Here we go. Okay, so this poem is called Gretel. It's a sort of a semi-persona poem written from the perspective of a sort of an alternate version of Gretel from Hansel and Gretel. In one version, the witch wins. What lesson in that, besides we get what we do not deserve? Cast out to follow a distant curl of smoke, we leave our past behind and find our way, or don't. That smoke might come not from a chimney, but the forest on fire, trees exploding, a column of flame 200 feet high. Take off your leather coat, brother, and let me put my hands against your chest. Even if we stop in the middle of the story and set out alone over these acres of scorched earth, filling up with more water than the sky can hold, still beyond us that curl of smoke, that who'd blame us if we mistook for home. So, now I feel like I should read. There's one Gretel poem. I sort of went back to this character of Gretel from the first book in this most recent book. So there's a poem in here called Gretel Returns, but I don't want to read it because it's serious. And one of the things that I had a lot of fun with in this fourth book was being somewhat less serious. Book number 3 was deadly serious. And wow, that got boring. The book is not boring, but being serious got boring. So I think I'm going to read some of the lighter poems from this book. So I'll start with the title poem, which is called Antillia. And I think the poem will explain what you might need or want to know about that. Excuse me. Sick with the kind of fever that makes you grateful for everything, I asked for the Moonlight Sonata, and he put it on, and I lay on the couch and drank orange, pineapple, mango juice, which was the best juice ever, even though it was just dull and not organic, and from a plastic-lined cardboard carton probably leaking phthalates. I couldn't taste them. I lay there with tears dripping into my ears, saying, "It's so beautiful," while he made coffee and toast with honey. It's easy to fall in love with heat when you have a fever and believe you're freezing. The same with hypothermia, when you're so cold you start to burn, and strew your clothes over the snow, as though death is a bedroom you're swept into by a passion so strong you don't care what thread and buttons you scatter behind. Why is even temperature so unreliable? And why was that bird in his yard a lesser goldfinch when it was perfectly yellow and lovely? And why are the Antilles lesser? Aren't they really less than lesser, since Antillia doesn't exist and never did? Like the Fortunate Islands, the Isles of the Blessed. Antillia means island of the other, or opposite island, or the inaccessible, meaning, of course, you, or hell is other people, or, as it was meant, hell is the otherness of people, meaning not the individual you. Don't worry, I'm not writing about you. You don't exist except as a phantom island. Sorry. If I were a bird, I might be the lesser Henrietta, but at least not the least. Though if you judged my worth based on how little you had to work to have me, you might understandably call me so. To be just given something of value, like the car my ex-husband's parents gave him after he drove his off a cliff. The idea that someone might give me a car I didn't have to work for all year in a greasy fried chicken place, if I had known all along that it was so easy. I felt duped. It's different kinds of work to obtain, to sustain, to validate, like parking. to keep my bad opinions to myself. It was knapweed honey that morning, from a noxious weed whose roots displaced the native nectar-producing blooms, diminishing the realm of the bees, while the bees make the sweetest, clearest honey. I'm going to read a completely ridiculous one now. This one's called Ice Apples. Were you a real apple once? I mean decades ago, as a little boy in plaid flannel eating peanuts in that faded picture. By ice apple, I mean a mold with no cast. In those orchards in the frozen Midwest, or on the unpruned tree in your backyard, mined by worms, slurped by bees, they shriveled, then froze and fell, leaving ice globes hanging like ornaments. You ran an ad and the gleaners came and raked the ground to feed pigs, or maybe boil into a not quite spoiled sauce. That was me, gleaning in the aftermath of your season's end. That summer night we drank ice wine at your mother's house. We were sitting, you said, on the eastern continental divide. You dribbled a little watered-down wine off the porch, said if you poured your glass out the front door, it would flow to the Atlantic and out the back to the Pacific. There, on Ridge Avenue, above the former swamp, above the confused river flowing backward forever now, there on the North Shore, you weren't even right about which divide you grew up on. The St. Lawrence River Divide, not the Eastern Continental. There are more divides than you knew, and the one your mother still straddles is mostly obsolete and has been since the reversal of the Chicago River, and the wine you poured out the front would have flowed to the Gulf of Mexico and out the back to the Labrador Sea. One more on the long list of things that made you special, that and having sex with John Cusack's little sister. I know, not Joan, the other one. The position, reverse cowgirl. Location, that house on the divide, or was it at the lake, on the dock, in plain sight? On your list of things that made you special, that and being what? That and being. I think I'm just going to read a couple more. Yeah. Let me see what page this is on. This book is so new that I have no idea. There. Earl, was this the one were you just talking about the Mr. No More Cowboy Hat poem? Were you saying I shouldn't read this poem?
No, you should.
Okay. Sorry, not sorry. This one is called Mr. No More Cowboy Hat. When's the last time anyone called you magnificent? Try never. On the edge of absurd, those M words. If he had called your voice mellifluous, you would have laughed. But how not to be charmed by a man wearing a cowboy hat in a swimming pool at night, who slides his hand up your leg from ankle to thigh and calls you magnificent? But was that the last night ever with that hat? Now it's glasses and hoodies, now it's compliments just state the obvious. And what happens when there's some practical problem? You're out of firewood and it's 20 degrees, and Mr. No More Cowboy Hat has a date with Deep Depression or Sunday football, so you split and load by yourself, fingers numb in splinter-covered gloves, tears pricking your eyes like the prick of a needle in a fairy tale that means something's going to change or freeze forever. You wish he would cry, that you could dig up his tears from however deeply they're buried and juice them like carrots. Is it empathy or fury that makes you imagine pushing them one by one into some kind of emotion juicer that is, you have to admit, something like a vagina, though you've never been that naive? Still, you imagine feeding them into a machine that both is and is not your body, petrified tears like the tusks of a woolly mammoth, like the whole mammoth excavated from eons of ice. Where in the body would you find them, stuck like kidney stones or salivary stones? And how to harvest them, those little daggers, a shiv or a shank hidden in a boot or belt or sock? When he said he's never lonely, you felt like you do when a student turns in a clearly plagiarized paper. If it's possible to plagiarize the absence of loneliness, which it is, though not convincingly, or why all those hours on Facebook, all those selfies in the hat before he stopped wearing it. So I'm just going to read one more. For a while I was kind of joking joking that I had this little series going in this book called The X's. And they were just people that I wanted to say bad things about. They deserved it. But they did. But by the time I got to the end, I started to, I really, as a sort of a poet who's always written in the post-confessional mode, I always feel like I need to scrutinize myself most of all before I just go around talking shit about people and being like, oh, poor me. So I got to the end of this book, and I've also been moving more towards writing nonfiction, and so this poem is a sort of an essay in poem form. But it's called Namaste, which is the thing that you say at the end of yoga that's supposed to be all spiritual, but it just means like hi. But, still, we're supposed to say it. So, excuse me. Namaste. That word you said, incorrigible. A brag from a boy pretending to apologize for his sexual appetite while showing off his vocabulary. A Holden Caulfield kind of word. Hot in high school, but annoying now. That boy who never grew up. Forgivable only if you're fictional. But I don't want to keep going, because once I make fun of you in a poem, it's all over. Even if you don't get mad, you'll get stuck there, and I'm tired of boys who get stuck, who die or sleep in a chair in their mother's basement with the TV on and crumbs in their beard. That's not you. How about corrugated instead, a fine word for cardboard or the fiberglass roof my son climbed onto to retrieve the frisbee and got splinters in his hands? Have I told you the thing he and I used to say in the car? You're Lester Schwab. No, you're Lester Schwab. Back and forth like the worst insult ever, while he narrated the social life of Lester and his wife Bertha and that other couple, Eugene and Ethel, that they play. What's that game old people play, Mom? Bridge with on Friday nights. You know I can't talk about Lost Boys without talking about my son. Or about Pete, whom we're both sick of. From him, I'm taking some things back. I'll start with those two songs. All the nights he came home at 2 or 3 or 4 a.m. and sat on the couch listening to a sped-up version of Springsteen's I'm on Fire, sung by a woman who probably looked like a suicide girl, all tattoos and black bangs, probably someone he knew, because I couldn't find that version anywhere, and it was good, that was the thing. She was on fire, and he was on fire, and I was on fire, half with the need for him to turn it off so I could sleep and get up at 6 and go to work, and half with jealousy, because if you know me at all, which you do, you know I wanted him no matter what, and you know, too, how badly I wanted to be the one singing. Which brings me to the other song, that time in Chicago at his mother's house when Melissa Minix posted to Facebook a video of her singing Angel from Montgomery, a few months of guitar lessons and a half-decent smoky voice, and I didn't even like the song, but I was on fire for her courage, and he picked that moment to tell me that when we lived in Lubbock and I thought he was fucking her and he said he wasn't, he was. Watching her strum along in her cute red cowboy boots, I thought of how he made fun of the way I said her name, as if I wanted to hiss or spit, as if I was saying minx, sleek and expensive, or menace, which I thought she was, though she likely had no idea I existed, and she was just another artsy single mom, a yoga teacher or massage therapist, pretty and good at touching people, the same woman he always chose, except me. More likely to throw tires across a gym than whisper namaste with my palms pressed together, but maybe it's time I did. Okay, now you get to hear Marc.
Wow, okay, thank you, Henrietta, that was fantastic. I wonder if I know any of those guys. Okay, so Marc Beaudin, some of you, this is a crazy that I'm going to be trying to introduce Marc in his own bookstore, but Marc Beaudin is a poet, theater artist, and bookseller here in Livingston, Montana. His work has appeared in High Desert Journal, Cutthroat, Whitefish Review, Ibis Head Review, and numerous other journals. And his work has been widely anthologized in publications fighting for environmental and social justice. So this is Marc's 4th book of poems. He's asked me not to mention another book here, so I won't.
But it's not poetry anyway.
Yeah, won't mention that. The Moon Cracks Open, Vagabond Song, Life List. Also from Coltrane to Coltrane, spoken word album collaboration with some musicians, Billy Conway and Lori Sargent. Tonight, Mark will be reading from a new collection, These Creatures of the Day, about which David James Duncan has had the following to say. In defiance of the darkness of our time, these creatures of a day left me feeling that a shock of hope could smite me from any direction around life's next blind corner. Please welcome Marc Beaudin.
I lost my reading copy. There it is. Thank you. That was brilliant. As Earl began to mention the new book, I realized that the reading copy that I had marked up, I was somewhere in this room. But I magically found it I was going to say just in time, but actually not. It was a little tardy to the stage. It happens. So thank you so much. It's always just a blast to have a new book out. And partly is, the book and the idea of a new tour, but also part of it is, I get to do a book launch party with my friends and family gathering, and it's just wonderful to have an excuse to bring you all together and hang out. So that's really half the reason to write a book, is to force your friends to come out and hang out with you. So thank you for doing your part. Let me start with the one that is near the beginning of the book, and it's kind of an older piece called Heartstones. The long shadows are suddenly gone, retracted by each host, every tree and shrub holding a dark double beneath its coat. Evening washes through the valley as the Yellowstone does, tasting each rock, hushing with a finger to wet lips. Once called Elk River by those who came before, and that other river, bleeding luminous above, was at one time the Wolf Road. I was known by other names, as were you, just as there will be new names for all of this someday. But as I bend in the gathering darkness to pick up a heart-shaped stone from river's ragged edge, I feel that some things are the same in every language, in every time. Some things are known and unknown in the same breath. The stone holds sunlight shimmering through willows, waters dancing with trout and transcendence, gold not in the land, but of the land, music of magpie, raven, and redtail. Despite the cold wind cutting at face and hands, I open my coat, unbutton my shirt, and hold the stone to my chest. The double heartbeat fills the valley, resonates on the star strings taut overhead, and reminds me, with whatever breath I have left, I will breathe with the stones of this river. That, I think that was originally in our anthology, Unearthing in Paradise, that we did a few years ago to stop some gold mines coming in, an emigrant, and just across the border from Yellowstone. So, the only design flaw with this beautiful lectern is there's not a good place for you to drink. Yeah. If it spills, it spills. Oh wait, I'll have to mop it up. So here's the poem that Henrietta was referring to. Just as she said, we were doing a gig at the Blue Slipper with Sean Devine and Garrett Stannard playing music, and Henrietta and I doing poetry. And in some of the promo for that, Sean had posted this poem of Henrietta's about Gretel, and it just kind of clicked, like, oh, a poem about fairy tale characters. Interesting. And this title popped into my head, and I wrote down the poem. And I kind of, partly I wanted to read it because Henrietta is here, and I have her to thank for the poem, and partly because It's one that will probably get me, in a lot of trouble reading it in certain places in Montana. It's called Little Boy Blue on His Deathbed. I was never asleep. I just didn't care. They weren't my sheep. They weren't my cows. My back was always a map of red from Boss Man's cane, and the more his daughter brought me water and stolen figs, the harder he hit. But no amount of rage would bring his wife back, and that lantern tipped in the barn might not have been an accident. The truth is, I only blew my horn to call the wolves in for dinner.
Damn, Mark!
Wow, I love it.
Yeah, that's Little Boy Blue. Deathbed confession. I had nothing to do with it. But yeah, I imagine there's certain regions of Montana where that might get me in trouble. It's kind of like, was it in Bozeman when Ed talked about starting a hunting season on cows? Okay. So here's another one called Quick Question. Since every glass of water you drink has filtered through countless dinosaurs, has touched the rocks of every river, has washed the bodies of whales and the ancestors of that trout you had for dinner with lemon butter and a sprig of rosemary, since every breath you breathe contains the fire of long dead stars, molecules of moonlight, and particles once belonging to Buddha and Basho, Cleopatra and Copernicus, Joan of Arc and Eva Braun. Since every song you've heard is composed of those same notes sung by Homer, played by Django Reinhardt, hummed by children skipping rope in Ghana, and cradled by seashells strewn across unnumbered beaches. Since the snowflakes melting on your tongue hold smoke from Roman campfires, dust from the farms of Okies, and the ashes of children of Hiroshima and Dresden, Dachau and Palestine. Since every echo you hear is an echo of an echo, which is the echo of another. Every heartbeat is a chorus, and every sunrise you watch is someone else's sunset. Considering all of this, how can you possibly tell me that there exists anywhere in this burning world of blood and marigolds some rough beast accurately called an individual? That's that. God, can I? Yeah, okay, I can do it. Read another one that is one of the newest ones in the book. In fact, there's two poems, and I might end up reading both of them tonight, that I wrote back to back, like sitting at a bar in Bozeman and writing. It's really good to get out of town to hang out and write, because if I try to sit in a Livingston bar and write, I end up having conversations with people I know. So it's really good to go to anywhere where people don't know you if you want to try to get some writing done. And so I wrote two poems back to back, hanging out, and this is the first of the two. And it's about a friend of mine, a dear friend from high school and a little bit into college, and just kind of it's a dead friend poem to warn you. So it's for Jeff. Because today, I'm told they found you after some days in your room that had become as silent as a room possibly can become. It had been nearly 20 years since I'd last seen you, but that meant nothing. Just as now, nearly as many again, nothing of you has faded from me. Because today, walking these college town streets, nearly a continent, and nearly both our lifetimes away from those days in Ann Arbor. Because today, walking these streets of hippie jewelry and sidewalk stands and overpriced camping gear for yuppie outdoorsy types and a violin busker on the road from Oregon. Because today, walking these streets through late summer heat and aromas drifting from dimly lit restaurants and the drunk townie yelling gibberish at sorority girls. Because today, walking these streets of young bodies moving through space as if everything were made for this moment, and air and flesh were forever fixed in a tableau of certainty. Because today, walking along these streets, you are suddenly with me, and we are still young and hungry, and everything is new and exotic, and we both have our whole lives ahead of us. Except one of us doesn't. Because what we didn't know then, and rarely ever do, is that silent room was always walking those streets with us too. Oh, look, here's the other one. and then I wrote this one. Minutes later. I was reading, is it pronounced Transtromer, you turned me on to this poet.
Yeah, I think Transtromer.
Transtromer, we'll say. The fantastic poet whose name I don't really know how to pronounce. But I picked up a book of his at Virgo's, and then went and sat at a bar and was reading the book and going to my journal, and as you do. It's like Billy Collins says, is it the trouble with poetry is that it makes you want to write more poetry, so you read poetry, then you have to write poetry, and it just never ends. Which is also a little bit, I think, what this poem may be about. It's called Distractions. This tiny bug, legs and wings almost invisible to my fading eyesight, a tenth of an eyelash blown from a finger to make a wish, come to life and landing on the book's page, distracting me from this poem by Transtromer. But maybe he planned it that way, that I would find this worn copy of his collection of poems in a used bookstore, that I would bring it to this bar and reading, come to this page during my second bottle of Modelo, and just as I read, they want to say something, the dead. He would have this tiny tenth of an eyelash bug land on the page and make me reach for my pen. And maybe you are reading my poem about reading his poem, and just at this moment, you are distracted by that woman's laugh, or the quick blade of shadow as a bird cuts the sun, or an itch behind your ear that in scratching the gesture reminds you of your grandfather. And so this conversation goes on from poet to poet, across the pages of secondhand books and beer-stained journals for as long as any of us have the capacity to pay attention in an easily distractible way. And what's that tune the passing waiter whistles as he takes you back to Omaha? That takes you back to Omaha. That makes more sense. These poems are too new. I've never read them before. So I'm gonna screw things up, especially because my glasses are not as strong as they're supposed to be, and I can't actually see what I'm doing. And I think, even though I was inspired by Transtromer, the energy of the final line is stolen from reading Earl Craig's poetry. What's that tune the passing waiter whistles that takes you back to Omaha? That just feels like a Earl Craig line, And I'm not afraid to steal. Not that he wrote that line, but you could have though. You could have written it, just like this whole poem I'm about to read that is dedicated to Earl Craig, and it's called First Poem on the Royal Quiet Deluxe, which is one of my typewriters that I use. I use several different typewriters to work on. And his first poem on the Royal Quiet Deluxe for Earl Craig. There is this, another thrift store find, another machine for pounding ink into the reluctance of the page, like a finger to a chest saying, "Listen up, bub." It's dark down here this morning, with a new whisper of snow and the threat of more holding the sky hostage. Almost too dark to read Earl's new book of poems, but clearly I've read some, or these words wouldn't sound like this. I wouldn't be drinking this coffee so goddamn slow. There are these dice, hand-carved from Costa Rica. There's spots like tiny black eyes of spiders. There is this photo of Sun Ra and John Gilmore, Ann Arbor, 1979. They are walking from the left of the photo to the right. They are going somewhere they need to go. There is the hum of the space heater, cough drops, a key to one of the doors of my life, but I forget which. A spring-activated magnifying glass from the modern litho plate service that I used to read the condensed edition OED Joe gave me before moving to Texas and dying. There is more coffee upstairs. If you're not familiar with Earl's poetry, you should rectify that as soon as you can. I'm going to skip those two. I'm going to go to these two. I'm going to do two more, I think. I didn't say anything about. Maybe I'll just briefly about the title of this book and the epigraph that one of the two quotations that are at the beginning of it. The title, "These Creatures of a Day," it comes from one of the translations of the Odyssey. And if any of you know, I'm a small fan of a book that's inspired by the Odyssey, or based on the Odyssey, a parallel to the Odyssey, whatever the hell Ulysses is. But in the T.E. Lawrence translation, when Zeus is complaining that humans are always blaming the gods for their woes and their troubles, when all along it's humans who create their own trouble, and then they're looking for a scapegoat. They're trying to blame it on some non-existent deity to get themselves off the hook and not take responsibility for their own trouble. But Lawrence translates humans or mortals as these creatures of a day, which I love, and I love the idea on a cosmic scale and on a Earth scale. We are just creatures of the day, and I think acknowledging that then leads to the very natural question: well, what are you going to do with your day? So that I think is at the heart of many of these poems, those ideas. The other thing is a quotation from a poet, Gu Chang, who says, "Born unfit to be a fish, I still have fish temptations," which is it's such a great line of poetry, I had to use it. But then the book is divided into different sections, and the first section is called Unfit to be a Fish, and the next section is called Fish Temptations, and then there's two other sections after that. But it occurred to me, that I think what that means for me personally, not at all what Gu Chang meant by it, but I may be born unfit to be a poet or anything else I do, but that doesn't matter because I still have these poet temptations. Like I can't not be a poet, and it doesn't matter if I'm good at it or not. What matters is I have to do it, right? So that's that idea for me anyway. But I could just be bullshitting you all. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Dougie, I love you. I'm glad you're here. This book is dedicated to my cousin Doug Peacock, and so I'm so glad that he's able to be here tonight.
Thank you, brother.
And this poem quotes Doug from one of the most beautiful books I've read called "Walking It Off" by Doug. And it quotes him when in that book he says, walk on, the feet will inform the soul. And, that bastard is a good poet. It drives me nuts what a good poet he is. He pretends he pretends he doesn't write poetry, but he nails it when he needs to. The poem is called Anatomy, and it starts with a quotation from Schiller's Ode to Joy, which of course is used in the Ninth Symphony, Beethoven, the choral movement. But it's in German, and I absolutely don't know how to pronounce German correctly, so I'll just give you, what it translates to is basically, even to the worm, ecstasy is granted, even the cherub stands before God. Anatomy. The bones remember everything that the heart forgets. The blood rises in noontide. The flesh has no choice but to follow. The feet will inform the soul, says Peacock, always a few steps off the trail. The hands cast shadows of monsters and angels, becoming birds when it rains. The tongue knows the difference between ecstasy and the worm, would rather sing than stand before God, who may have created us in his image, but not before we created him in ours. And then I think I'll do one more. I'm guessing everyone here has heard this poem. Maybe it's called This Poem. I do it all the time, but it's funny and it's. Maybe I'll do it. I was gonna do a different one to end with, but it just feels like kind of a downer to end on. So let's end on something a little livelier, right? And forgive me if you've heard this one too much.
We can never hear it too much.
Oh, good. Okay.
Never.
Thank you. This poem was born on the wrong side of the tracks. This poem carries a razor in its boot. This poem is in bad need of a shave. This poem is written in tattoo ink on the thigh of a stripper. This poem is written in spray paint on the side of a fast-moving train. This poem ain't bound for glory. You're going to need a bigger boat for this poem. This poem meets the devil at the crossroads and runs him over. This poem will make you an offer you can't refuse. This poem will never get the good housekeeping seal of approval or be recommended by 4 out of 5 dentists who read poetry. The FBI has pictures of this poem at all the post offices. The ATF has orders to shoot this poem on sight. The Supreme Court has ruled that this poem has no right to its own bodily autonomy. Just by listening to it, you are complicit in crimes against the state, as well as the tenets of the Chamber of Commerce, the Better Business Bureau, the PTA, the NRA, and the DMV. This poem made the brown acid. The Surgeon General warns that this poem has been shown to cause cancer in laboratory animals. Do not listen to this poem if pregnant, under the influence of alcohol, or while operating heavy machinery. The thoughts of this poem continue after hearing it. Discontinue use and consult physician immediately. This poem may cause runny nose, headaches, nausea, shortness of breath, memory loss, joint pain, fainting, blindness, botulism, communism, anti-disestablishmentarianism, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, no blood pressure, coma, and or death. Ask your doctor if this poem may be right for you. We have just received unconfirmed reports by anonymous sources from an undisclosed location that there is no need for alarm. This poem is merely a figment of your imagination, a harmless byproduct of the mass hysteria caused by accidentally living in the 21st century. Please continue shopping and have a nice day. This poem will be watching. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, if come, do you want, if anyone has any questions for either of us, we are happy
Yes.
to,
Ooh, Q&A,
to
Q&A.
make things up. So, anyone? Nobody wants to ask a poet a question. I don't know. Can I ask about a poem? What?
You might get some magnificent word answers.
Oh, there's a question. Yes.
Thank God.
First of all, thanks for sweeping the sidewalk.
Oh,
I
yes.
complained about the dirt on the sidewalks on this side of the street. But anyway, the other thing is when I came here during COVID and you were writing poetry, is this a result or did you write some other stuff after that? I mean, did you publish a book after COVID? You were kind of in here writing. Every time I came in, I said, we're smart, and they said, he's writing.
Oh, they might have been lying. I was probably at the bar.
Okay.
So I wrote Life List. That came out in 2020. My last book of poetry, and so it, some of it was written. Well, actually, no. All those poems were written before COVID. The book release was during the lockdown. We had to do a virtual book release. But in this book, there are a couple of poems written during the lockdown that are definitely, I think you can hear that silence in them. One called Opus 29. That's very much.
In other words, what circumstances kind of inspire you to write? I guess that's what,
Oh,
you know what I mean? Certain ones, something in your life happens, or I can see death and different things like that. Some experience happens, and then you feel like writing. Is that kind of?
It's usually, for me, something will start with just a phrase, the music of some words, an image, and then as I write it, the poem clues me in as what it wants to be about. I almost never set out trying to write about a certain thing. I just write about what I see out the window, and then the poem that needs to be written right then shows up and finds its way into what I'm working on. How about you? What do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of assignment-based stuff, like the Milo of Croton thing. I mean, I had no idea. That wasn't, I'd never heard of him, so I certainly would never have set out to write about him. And I had no idea that poem was going to make that sudden sort of introspective turn at the end. And I think like you're saying, I mean, I'll latch on to a concept or an image, and then often I'll do a lot of research and just kind of dig in and let it sit for a while, and then write down a bunch of things, and then suddenly the poem sort of, it's like, I don't know, it's like excavating, right? I mean, there's like a big wall of mud or something, and then I'm thinking about excavators. We had that conversation, but it is like, I mean, and then you dig and dig and dig, and then you find the thing in there, and I mean, like sculpting in a way, right?
So this is kind of an interesting, I feel like I'm discovering, Mark, that you write poems, let's say accidentally, or maybe instinctively. And then after you've accumulated a bunch of them, then you think, oh, this is a book. And then you figure out a title to hang on your book and go, I made a book.
That's kind of what happened with this one.
But then Henrietta seems to write these like whole books. Like your books of poetry seem as if you've conceived of the idea of a poetry book, and then you flesh it out with individual poems, which is amazing if that's true.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I definitely know. I think was it the same for you? I mean, first book, always, not always. I also think there's more of a trend now in the past like 15 to 20 years for books to be more unified around a particular theme or experience.
I'm thinking of your book of sonnets, in which the first line of the or is that the book of sonnets where each poem is kind of the first line of the succeeding poem comes from the previous poem.
That was a special case. I don't even know that, but yeah, I mean, I definitely that was.
You
a
seem to have started
concept,
with an overarching concept there.
But I don't know that that's always. I mean, what do you?
Yeah. Well, my last book was a field guide to birds, but in poetry.
So that
So
was very
every book,
concept,
and every poem
piece, yeah.
either at least mentioned a different bird species, or was about a bird, or about experience with a bird, or a bird showed up during some experience. And so that was very, once I realized that that was the direction I was heading for my next book, that it was going to be this field guide to the birds, then it became very intentional that I was writing.
You had to come up with some bird poems, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I had, the thing is, without trying, birds show up in my poems. They're just almost always there. And I realized that I needed to honor them, for all the poems they've given me. And so that led to the idea of doing the book. But then once I was doing the book, I realized that, okay, well, I have like, 40 of these, I need more. So I did then, seek out ideas or experiences that had a bird connected to them, yeah. Whereas with this book, a lot of these poems were just written over the course of however many years. A lot of them I wrote before my last book, but they didn't fit in that book because they weren't, connected to a bird.
Yeah.
So they had to wait their turn, But that idea of starting to write, and for me it's often an image or just a little piece of music. By music I mean, these few words together have the right sound and it's interesting to my ear. And then I just start writing. It's kind of like Richard Hugo talks about in Triggering Town, that, you may start writing about, I started writing about this little bug landing on the page as I was, trying to write, and it turned into, that was the trigger for the actual poem. The actual poem was about this connection, this lineage from poet to poet. It wasn't about the bug. But the bug is the trigger that gets your pen moving. The trick is just to let the poem go where it needs to go and get out of your own way and quit trying to control it.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
So you mentioned how Doug's prose has poetry in it, and I'm wondering, both of you, how your poetry might affect your prose or inform your prose in some way, or does it even?
Do you write prose?
I do.
You do.
Do you?
You did
Against my will, yeah.
You have a book. It's good.
Oh, that's right.
Wait, is that before else?
So no, Vagabond Song is it's called Neo-Haibun because it blends prose and poetry together, and it's mostly prose. I do think, I'll say that because of my attention to poetry, I'm focused on the music of a phrase, and I think I told you when we were talking about Vagabond Song, and I said that my goal for the book is every line must sing. And of course you fail at a goal like that, but that was the goal. And so, I believe that the music is where the meaning is, rather than the other way. If you're focused on the meaning, not only will you probably not have the music, but your meaning will be maybe a cliche or maybe, but if you're focused on the music, the meaning will come out in a stronger way. What about your prose? What do you write?
So that last poem that was like pulling a bunch of different threads and was also very long and very sort of conversational. I mean, I think that was the point at which I started sitting down to write poems. And then, maybe 8 years ago, I was in Ohio doing a reading, and the poet George Looney told me this story about how when he was little, he would chase milkweed fluff across the fields of Ohio. And I said, oh, George, I'm going to put that in a poem. Not like I'm going to write a poem about that, but that image, because George is like a very grown-up, very, very sturdy person, and yet this image was so beautiful of him and like ethereal. And I never even, milkweed, I don't know, it's a thing here, but I had never really seen it. And so I was going for runs while I was there and seeing milkweed, and it was this exotic thing to me. And then, so I filed that away. And did a little bit of research about milkweed, and then did some more, and then literally years passed, and I felt guilty because I had not written this poem that had George Looney chasing the milkweed fluff in it. And the more guilty I felt about it, the more I didn't write it. And finally I was like, fuck it, it's time to write it. And it was an essay. And it was a lyric essay or a braided essay where you can, you have all the threads, and it almost doesn't even matter what order you put them in, because they're all coming together. I mean, it matters by the end, but you can juxtapose things, and I mean, juxtaposition in poetry is how so many poems work. You just put two things side by side, and the connection is there. You don't have to do all the work to connect them. The reader will assume connection and will look for connection because you put them side by side, and you're the poet, so you must have seen a connection, even if you didn't consciously. So, it wasn't a poem. It was this 15-page essay about milkweed. And also I just used the word exotic, which I used in the first draft, and then I started digging into this idea of exotic in relation to plants and invasive species and our ideas about what exotic really means. And that became one thread. And then all of this information about milkweed became another thread. And then relationship issues became one of the threads. And it's all, coming together in exactly the same thing that I'm trying to do in poems. So, yeah, it's fun. It's like there's so much freedom. You write 20 pages, you can write a whole fucking book. It's amazing. Yeah.
She's nuts.
What?
I said, bottom line, she's nuts.
Oh, well, okay, that's fair. Hey, Mark's leaving.
I'm not running away. I just realized that. No, come back. I just realized that you were probably not on camera because it was just zoomed in on the
and you were
lectern.
like, oh, I'm going to go get Henrietta a beer if this conversation is going
Well, are you ready for a beer?
No.
We're gonna get 2
I'm
beers.
good.
Are there any more questions? Questions?
I mean, she's not crazy, so that's just like...
Unless somebody wants to run to the back fridge and grab a couple of beers out of there. Yes.
Do you feel like, I don't know if I have all my words together here, do you feel like you're just along for the ride when you write?
Partly, yeah.
Which right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel...
What kind of ride?
Yeah, I feel like the poem knows what it needs to say, and if I try to dictate what it's going to say, it fails. If I realize that, if I just follow the music and let the music of this line lead me to the music of that line, and the image of this lead to the image of that, without thinking about I am trying to make a statement about global warming, or I'm trying to make a statement about whatever. If I just kind of keep my pen moving and keep my ears open, the poem will do what it wants to do. It and not to get all woo esoteric, but it does feel like the poem that exists out there somewhere, and my job is to just bring it into this world.
Yeah.
Is it like the music of the Spears?
Maybe, I don't know. But now I'm going to have Rush songs stuck in my head as you say that.
But
How about you? Are you a Rush
It is
fan?
your brain, though. I mean, the thing that is so magical about it to me is that, I don't believe that it comes from, I don't think you're saying that it comes from somewhere outside the self, but
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
it's you're a poet, you know how to write poetry, and like you said, if you get out of your own, sort of tendency to mastermind things, I mean, your brain's gonna do it, but you don't know what it's gonna do till it does it, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it is, and that's to me that's why it's magical. 'Cause
Yeah.
and I don't mean magical like it's magic. I mean it's magical that you didn't know that that's what you were writing about until it's there. The poem I didn't read tonight that ends the book. So when you buy your copy of the book, which you can do tonight, it ends with a poem called "The Magic Kitchen and Laundry." And the only reason I wrote that poem is because I was reading again Richard Hugo, and this idea of this cool, funky, small town bar. I'm going to write a poem, and the title of the poem is the name of that bar. I thought that's cool. I like that idea, and then I remembered this place back in Saginaw, Michigan, that was a laundromat that had a restaurant in it, and it was called the Magic Kitchen and Laundry, and the best sweet potato pie in town, right? And I thought, that's a great title, The Magic Kitchen and Laundry. having no clue what the poem was about. And I just started writing, the best sweet potato in town comes from that East Side laundromat, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know it was going to be about this character who shows up, who's a prostitute and is struggling to feed her kids in what it says in the poem, and one of the few jobs America has offered. And then ending with her remembering her childhood of seeing a matinee of the Nutcracker and wanting to be the ballerina she's watching, who is, spinning into a blur and leaping free of all the hands that are trying to hold her. If I had set out thinking, I'm going to write a poem about poverty and, how women are forced into prostitution and, blah, 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 it would have been a terrible poem, right? But I didn't know I was writing any of that. I was just writing about sweet potato pie, in this funky place I used to hang out. So. Me too. This is why I love poetry, because where the hell did, it was all in there somewhere. But I never would have found it had I been trying to write a poem about poverty, right? It would have been a terrible mistake. Anyone else?
Thanks, man.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much. As soon as I grab a couple of beers, Henrietta and I will be up here at the table to sign books. And what's that? Yes, we will. And I'll put some music on, hang out, have some more wine, buy lots of books. And thank you so much for coming.
Mark. Yeah.